Hello, welcome to all of you. Welcome to this session on Joan Miró, Modern Arts and the Legacy of Art Historical Archives. A roundtable discussion related to the exhibition Miró-ADLAN, an Archive of Modernity 1932-1936 at the Fundació Joan Miró here in Barcelona, from which I am speaking. I'm Marko Daniel, director of the Fundació Joan Miró. With me here tonight are the three curators of the exhibition, and we will be joined by Anne Umland from the Museum of Modern Art in New York, who will chair this discussion. The three curators are Muriel Gómez Pradas of the Universitat Oberta de Catalunya, Joan Minguet Batllori of the Universitat Autònoma de Barcelona, and Jordan Mendelsohn of New York University. The exhibition that we are currently showing, it will be on until the 4th of July here, is a really interesting project. It's a research exhibition, it's an archival exhibition, it's a project that's based on a number of years of research into a group of artists, intellectuals, friends of the arts, who literally called themselves ADLAN, the Friends of New Art. And what we are seeking to do with this exhibition is to show a particular moment in the history of Barcelona, a particular moment when Barcelona was really trying to establish its place as a center of modern life, modern activity, when Barcelona was trying to come out of a reputation that it had previously had as perhaps a slightly more backwards city. Certainly that was one of the impressions that Miró himself had had earlier in his life. And also a project that demonstrates how Miró, at this particular point, just after the establishment of the Second Spanish Republic, returned to exhibiting his most recent, his newest production in Barcelona, contrary to the kind of stereotypical art historical view, which holds that between 1918, his first exhibition at the Galeries del Mau, and his big retrospective exactly 50 years later in 1968, that he, in that long period, he didn't really do anything in Barcelona. But this exhibition shows that he was in fact involved in a number of very important projects in which he showed his newest productions in Barcelona before then taking them overseas to Paris, to Zurich, to New York, and so on. What's very important for us is the role of archives that's played in this exhibition. It's an exhibition that makes extensive use of public and private archives, archives that are largely also held in the College of Architects here in Barcelona, to whom we're very grateful for their collaboration. And it's an exhibition that makes, I think, a very interesting use of this juxtaposition of archive material, documentary material, and artworks. The curators will speak more about this. And of course, one of the things that I think we can all be looking forward to is the appearance shortly of the publication that accompanies this exhibition. The exhibition is part of a series called Miró Documents that has been running here at the foundation for a number of years, and which consists of very thorough and at the same time beautifully produced publications that showcase new research around Miró and around the archive. As a final point, perhaps I should say that for those of you who don't know the Miro Foundation so well, one of the cornerstones of our collection is the fact that we have more than 10,000 works on paper here, in addition, obviously, to the paintings, sculptures, and other unique works of art. And so this exhibition brings together these different elements of our work. And I will, if that's okay, thank also New York University's King Juan Carlos Center for hosting this conversation, for inviting us all here, and for giving us this opportunity to share our exhibition and the research of our curators with you all. So thank you very much, and over to Anne Umland of the Museum of Modern Art.
Thank you, Marko, and thank you all for inviting me to join you today. So as Marko said, my name is Anne Umland, and I'm a curator at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. And I have the tremendous good fortune to work at a place with a wonderful collection of Miro's work, including his landmark 1925 painting, The Birth of the World, that is currently on view in our newly installed collection galleries. And I think it's fair to say that Miró and I go way back. I like to say that he was really my first true love as an art historian. His collages of the 1920s were the subject of my doctoral dissertation. And I've had the tremendous privilege not only of installing his works here in MoMA's collection galleries, but of organizing several Miró exhibitions. His work never ceases to fascinate me. And so I'm just so grateful to Jordana and Muriel and Joan and Marko for inviting me to participate in today's roundtable discussion focused around their beautiful, judging from the installation views, since sadly COVID has still prevented me from traveling, but very beautiful and very eye-opening exhibition that takes this deep dive into the papery promotional world that surrounds Miro's works of the first half of the 1930s and his relationship to the organization ADLAN. So I have the responsibility for sort of keeping us moving along today. So we have an hour together, and we are going to begin with brief presentations from each of our panelists, Jordana, Muriel, Joan, Marko, and myself, about a work or document from the show that speaks to an aspect of Miró and ADLAN. And then during the second part of our roundtable, I will pose questions for discussion to the exhibition's co-curators about 3 different related themes. And finally, time permitting, and we're going to make sure that time does permit, the roundtable will conclude with an open discussion among the 5 of us about Miro's position in modern art, and sort of the larger question, I think, that you ask of any exhibition, which is, how does this exhibition change what we think about Miró? Does it leave him with a different identity than the one that we had before we saw the show? So with no further ado, I guess that's the right word, I have the privilege of introducing Muriel, who is going to be our first speaker about an object or document.
Thank you, Anne. Hola, hola a todos, buenas tardes, buenas noches aquí casi desde Barcelona. Yo he escogido como objeto para hablar de la exposición un documento, una carta que escribió Miró a Prats el 4 de septiembre de 1932, porque para ejemplificar básicamente lo que ha dicho Marko antes, es una exposición de archivos, una exposición de documentos, y creo que es una manera de introducir tanto la exposición como las diferentes maneras de ver a Miró. Es una carta en la cual Miró nos habla de Calder, de Alexander Calder, y nos servirá para ver cómo la conexión personal, la incipiente relación de amistad que había entre Miró y Calder fue la que propició que en 2 años intensos, entre el 32 y en el 33, Calder tuviera una presencia activa en nuestra ciudad, en Barcelona y en nuestro país. Pero lo que es más importante es que nos permitirá mostrar cómo a Miró como una figura poliédrica, como una figura, como un vínculo, como un mediador cultural, ¿no? Como una persona que facilitó y que contó con diversas complicidades para dar a conocer en nuestro país, en nuestra ciudad, representantes de la vanguardia internacional afincada en París. En este caso concreto hablaremos de Calder, ¿no? En esta carta, Miró, aparte de explicar muchas cosas, le pide a Prats que cuando llegue Calder a Barcelona en un barco carguero, que lo vaya a buscar, que le presente a Gas, que le presente a varias gente y que además le enseñe cómo llegar hasta Montroig. Y esto es importante porque la primera representación del circo de Calder no se hace en Barcelona, sino que se hace en un sitio muy especial para Miró, que es Montroig, su masía. Calder luego regresa a Barcelona y con ADLAN se le organiza una representación del circo en el hall de la sede de GATPAC en Paseo de Gracia. Y la revista Publicidad, que hay en unos álbumes fantásticos que están en la exposición donde se recoge toda la repercusión que tuvo en prensa, dice que todos los atlantistas se fueron a este evento de Barcelona. Al año siguiente, en el año 33, el matrimonio Calder regresa a Barcelona y añade en su itinerario una ciudad más, una ciudad como Madrid, gracias precisamente al buen hacer de Miró. Esto lo explica en el propio Calder, lo explica Calder en sus escritos, pero además en la carta que he seleccionado, la del 4 de septiembre del 32, Miró ya le dice a Prats que ha escrito a Gómez de la Serna para explicarle el tema del circo de Calder y a ver si organizan alguna cosa. Precisamente unos días después hay una carta otra vez de Miró a Prats, el 9 de septiembre, en la cual le dice que ya ha tenido respuesta de Ramón Gómez de la Serna y le dice, y cito textualmente, a Ramón Gómez de la Serna le interesa mucho la idea que yo le propongo para el circo. Se podría hacer de manera que la exhibición de Barcelona coincidiese con la de Madrid y así iría mejor tanto para el viaje como para el transporte. Por lo tanto, vemos como realmente este papel de enlace, de mediador de Miró es claro, incluso llegándose a preocupar de aspectos económicos como puede ser de la sostenibilidad de las exposiciones que se organizaban, ¿no? Por lo tanto, este papel principal de Miró como catalizador, ¿no? Como conectando intereses, en este caso el circo como actividad artística y conectando también personalidades, Calder, Gómez de la Serna, Prats, Gas. Es decir, un papel que también nos habla mucho de la propia predisposición de Miró hacia este tipo de obras, ¿no? Tras Madrid, Calder vuelve a Barcelona, donde hace en las Galerías Siras 2 representaciones de su circo y además hace una muestra o exhibe tanto móviles como dibujos. Esto es interesante porque en relación a esta exposición de dibujos y móviles hay diversas cartas entre Prats y Miró, entre Prats y Calder, que se conservan en el Colegio de Arquitectos, en el que se puede constatar como la idea de mostrar los dibujos junto a los móviles es del Calder, pero basándose en las ideas de Miró. El mismo Calder le explica a Prats Miró me dijo una noche que había mostrado sus cuadros en casa. Si lo desea, puedo traer algunos dibujos que hice recientemente y mostrarlos de la misma manera. Es decir, es la conexión perfecta con nuestra exposición en el cual lo que hacemos realmente es mostrar estas exposiciones privadas que hizo Miró en su casa y que Calder tomó como ejemplo. Por lo tanto, esta labor de archivo lo que nos ha posibilitado es sacar a la luz el rol de Joan Miró como verdadero mediador cultural, utilizando las palabras actuales, ¿no? Conectando ciudades, conectando artistas, creando y organizando espacios, podríamos decir, de confluencia, ¿no? Entre artistas nacionales y entre artistas internacionales, entre diferentes narrativas expositivas, entre contextos muy diversos, pero que todos tenían un interés en común, que era el arte nuevo, el arte moderno. Por lo tanto, unas conexiones, unas redes sociales cuyo conocimiento nos pueden proporcionar o nos proporcionan una manera diferente de ver y de entender la historia de la modernidad en nuestra ciudad.
So thank you, Muriel, and for that wonderful illuminating talk about Miró as a connector, right, and a networker of a la lettre. So it's now my turn to speak, so I'll introduce myself, Anne Umland again. And I wanted to look first at this wonderful image of Jordana, Muriel, and Joan's installation, because judging from it, again, not having been able to experience this show in person, it looks to me that the installation itself sort of underscores the central point of your show, which is the very important role that print culture played in disseminating ADLAN's modern program. You know, as I read in your catalog, Prats and Cert and Miró all recognized that one of the most effective conduits through which they could promote modern art in and beyond Barcelona was through print culture, through the magazines, the limited edition prints, the notices, the pieces of paper, the activities published in the press. And when you look at this installation image, you can really see how these papery material traces of ADLAN's promotional activity have taken center stage, right? They are sort of the stars of the show, with Miró's works of the time juxtaposed with them, but around the periphery, which I found interesting as a way of making the two bodies of work speak to each other. And so out of all those wonderful works that you have on your walls in this show, I chose a pair of a 1933 collage and a painting from that same year that is directly related to it. And I think that this pair of works is one that has fascinated myself, Jordana, probably any number of art historians for many, many years. And I loved the opportunity that the ADLAN show gives us to sort of look at these again. So just for those of you who are tuning in who are not Miró nerds, the way the story goes about these two works that you're looking at on the screen, which you might initially say, what do they have to do with each other, right? One is this collage on Ang paper with all these little tiny cutout photomechanical reproductions of a series of plates, of tools. Even if you look up at the upper right, I'm presuming you can see this, a wheelchair is up there, and all clipped, as we know, thanks to Felix Fanez's meticulous research. All of these little cuttings come from local Catalan print publications. And the other thing that I love about this collage, and I don't know if you can see it on the screen or not, but if you look down in the lower left corner, you can see two sets of dates. And the first one is February 9th, 1933. And that, it turns out, is the date that Miró finished this collage. And this collage is but one of a whole series of 18 that Miró created in Barcelona between January 26th and February 11th. And then he equally systematically and methodically and obsessively set out to create 18 paintings inspired by these collages, completed between March 3rd and June 13th, 1933. And so the painting that you're looking at on the right is dated on its back, June 1st, 1933. And Miró, to make sure that for posterity, no one loses track of the connection between his big painting and his little tiny paper collage. If you look again at the lower left of that collage, you'll see parenthetically, he includes the canvas size and the date of his painting, making sure that history, at least, could put the pair back together again. However, right at the time, these two works, the paper and the painting, were not shown as an ensemble. And Jordana is nodding away because she wrote a wonderful essay on the series of paintings based on collages for an exhibition catalog that we worked on in 2008. And so looking at them in the ADLAN show made me want to go back and read that wonderful essay again to see if it sort of, if I had different questions from those that you asked of them, Jordana. You know, what happens when you look at the papery clipped out collage in the center of all this other archival material? And I think in your essay, I'm going to quote you a little bit. I hope it's not embarrassing, but you noted, quote, The multiplicity and seriality of the collage elements suggest an interest in commodity, circulation, and mass reproduction, end quote. And I think to me that is so spot on, because obviously that interest is just amplified and confirmed by this ADLAN context. And the other thing you did was to draw all of these comparisons between Miro's process and that of, again to quote, a finely skilled assembly line worker, end quote, who applied an industrial logic to create a system of pictorial representation in a mechanical manner akin to factory work. And I looking back, thought, I mean, I love that image of Miro as a factory worker and as that churning things out, and the way that, right, this idea of reproduction and seriality is sort of becoming part of his process. But looking at them within the ADLAN exhibition made me think, as you all have argued too, that of course, to not only the factory worker, we have to add another, which is Miro the archivist, and Miro the careful chronicler, and Miro who is someone who is driven at least as much by an archiving impulse, right, as an industrial logic, and who's these cutting and pasting and composing of collages preserves his process and thus his conscious engagement with Catalan art and culture, not initially for public exhibition, but very much for the archives and for posterity. So what was I going to say? I have no real conclusion of it than to say that I think that his collage and painting pairings continue to fascinate. Oops, Joan is saying something on a chat. I shouldn't pay attention. Okay. So all I was going to say in conclusion is that I have been intrigued, and I was not aware before your show of how so many of the ADLAN events were private. They were elite, right? And I find that there is a peculiar tension between ADLAN's desire to create a new public for modern art and the private character of their events. And I see that same tension playing out in Miro's collages being sort of a secret for many, many years, and their Catalan sources hidden, and then the publicly presented paintings. So, okay, I now will thank myself. Thank you, Anne, for those remarks. And we will next turn to Joan.
Thank you, Anne, and thank you so much, Jordana, for this encounter. Moltes gràcies, estimada Jordana. Yo he elegido una de las piezas que tenemos en la exposición, que es el collage de homenaje que Joan Miró realiza a Joan Prats a partir o mediante las fotos de los sombreros que Joan Prats vendía en su tienda y que promocionaba a través de unos catálogos preciosos que realizaba cada año. La mayoría de los cuales de estos catálogos de venta de sombreros, la mayoría de fotos estaban realizados por el fotógrafo Josep Sala. He elegido este collage que, digamos, tiene una amplia conexión con todos los collages de los años 30 realizados a través de fotografías, de postales, que realizó Joan Miró, en parte por seguir con la estela que había empezado Muriel, es decir, con esa última conexión entre Joan Miró y los amigos de ADLAN, muy especialmente Joan Prats. Pero quisiera ir un poco hacia atrás, porque me parece que hay personas que seguramente verán este programa, esta sesión, que no sabrán un hecho fundamental en la historia artística de Barcelona, perdón, de Joan Miró. Y es que en 1918 Joan Miró realiza su primera exposición en Barcelona, su primera exposición individual, en la mítica, para nosotros mítica, Galerías Dalmau. Pero aquella exposición fue un absoluto fracaso. Los coleccionistas catalanes no compraron nada de lo que se exhibía de Joan Miró en aquella exposición. La crítica, excepto algunos que le dejaron más o menos bien, la crítica fue muy dura con esa exposición. E incluso hubo ataques personales. En realidad, esta exposición de 1918 de Miró, este fracaso, por decirlo así, es el que impulsará a Joan Miró a irse hacia París. Y en ese impulso de irse hacia París en 1920 será el que le llevará después a ese prestigio internacional que conseguirá con una cierta celeridad, ¿no? En 1925 con su exposición, pero sobre todo en 1928 con la exposición en la Galería Georges Bergheim de París. A partir de este fracaso en la exposición de Barcelona y de que Miró marche hacia París, durante muchos años se pensó que Miró había renegado de su ciudad natal, que había mantenido unos contactos muy episódicos con la cultura catalana. Y no es cierto, ya sabemos hace años que no es cierto, pero en nuestra exposición creo que lo ponemos, digamos, de relieve, cómo Miró realiza una operación en un doble sentido. En primer lugar, realiza una operación de, como ha señalado Muriel antes, de mediación, de intentar que Barcelona se convierta en una pequeña ciudad abierta a las vanguardias, abierta a la modernidad, en contra de la tradición noucentista, de la tradición más conservadora de la burguesía catalana. Y hay otra cosa que realiza Joan Miró de una forma digamos, muy concreta y muy absoluta, que es controlar todo lo que se dice sobre él por parte de sus amigos. Hay una foto de Sebastià Gasch, Joan Miró y Joan Prats en Montroig, de este viaje que realizan Prats y Gasch a Montroig. Da cuenta el propio Gasch en un artículo en el que habla de los objetos escultóricos que está realizando Miró. Pero esta foto nos enseña dos cosas. Una, la visible, que es esa amistad entre los tres personajes, esa amistad que se prolonga en ADLAN, en los amigos del arte nuevo. Pero hay otra cosa que no enseña la foto, pero está, digamos, escondida en las múltiples cartas que envía Miró a sus amigos. Y es que Miró controla lo que, por ejemplo, hay una carta de los años 30 que le prohíbe expresamente a Gasch que hable de su exposición en París. Hay una carta de 1931 que le envía a su amigo Raffles sugiriéndole que guarde todas las cartas que se están enviando porque será importante. Miró tenía una concepción muy, casi diríamos, como mágica, una concepción de lo que tenía que ser Barcelona y que no había podido ser. El gran descubrimiento que realizamos en el proceso de realización de esta exposición que ahora está en la Fundación Joan Miró es que ese punto de control, ese punto de mediación, pero de mediación no dejándolo al aire, digamos, dejándolo sin control, como digo, es que Miró había realizado 5 exposiciones de su obra previamente a que estas obras marchasen hacia exposiciones ya pactadas en las galerías de arte de París, en el Kunsthaus de Zúrich o en la Pierre Matisse Gallery de Nueva York. Estas exposiciones son unas exposiciones que tampoco les podemos dar un carácter, digamos, excesivo. Pueden llegar a ser anécdotas en la historia del arte de la vanguardia, pero es que a veces uno se da cuenta de que la historia del arte contemporáneo, que la historia del arte de las vanguardias está hecho de ocurrencias, está hecho de vicisitudes que muchas veces nos cuesta explicar. Y esta es, para nosotros, creo que es muy relevante. El hecho de que Miró quisiese de forma absoluta enseñar a sus amigos del arte nuevo, a los defensores del arte nuevo en Barcelona, quisiese enseñar todas estas obras maravillosas, entre las cuales están los collages de los que hablaba Anne Umland ahora mismo, quisiese enseñar a ese público minoritario, selecto de los amigos del arte nuevo.
Thank you, Joan. That was another eye-opening discussion. Jordana, I think you are next. Thank you.
I am. I chose an object that I adore from this exhibition. It is an envelope, and it is an envelope with the lettering for ADLAN. And on top of the envelope, Miró has sketched, drawn. There's documentation about what that drawing is of. It was a kind of preparatory sketch for a pamphlet for a performance of the dancer Joan Magriñá, so around 1935. I love this envelope because for me, it literalizes and embodies the idea of Miró and ADLAN, him literally sketching himself onto the stationery of the organization. I would also say that I'm a bit of a fan of stationery and all things papery, as you said. My grandparents were stationers. I love paper. I love the way it feels and smells. And I think in that I share something with Miró. And I wanted to just read a quote that his grandson, Joan Miró, added to an essay in the catalog on Miró and the Object from a show a few years ago that struck me as perfectly illustrating Miró's openness to all things paper, not just fine or elevated, but every kind of paper and ephemera. And he wrote, "It seems pertinent to remember Miró's love story with paper, independent of its origin or quality, whether letters, invitations, sheets, or envelopes, all had the same value for him, the same importance." When I read that, it just gave me goosebumps, because if you look at photographs of Miró's studio, you see paper everywhere. As Marko indicated in the foundation, 10,000, thousands of sketches, but also sketches on paper that was reused, picked up, admired. I like to imagine how Miró got this envelope. I wonder if the invitation card for his own show was delivered to him in this envelope, if the envelope carried invitations to other events like Magriñá. Well, it couldn't have been the invitation to Magriñá's performance, since he sketched the drawing that would then go for its, well, perhaps anyway, all of these chronologies are a little bit interesting to explore as well. But I also wonder, is it that Miró visited ADLAN at the, Paseo de Gracia and swiped a bit of stationery to bring home? So I really, for me, it leads to a lot of imagination about not only the use of paper by Miró as a creative tool. And I think, and if I could revise that essay that I wrote many years ago, I would have added kind of archivist, because or librarian or
yes.
cataloger, right? Because I think the industrial worker is appropriate, because Miró was extremely disciplined in the way that he approached work and making artwork. And I don't think he was alone in that. I think, Alexander Calder, many of the artists of that generation were workmanlike in their approach and discipline to making art. But I also think about Miró as kind of a paper keeper. And one imagines, tickets, stationery, envelopes being amassed and collected and laid out in the studio and used and reused again. So I like to think about Miró not as an innocent with regard to paper. I like to think about Miró as a taker, an appropriator, a collector, an amasser. And I really enjoy thinking about it in relation to this envelope in particular. How did it get to him? So I imagine many, many different lives for this envelope and envelopes like it. So that's enjoyable for me when we look at that, as well as also the creativity of wondering whether Miró, in making that drawing, is interacting with the typography from his drawing collages from the 1930s, where he would interact with postcards and different bits of ephemera, and how we've talked about those lines kind of moving in and around and behind, right? Those pieces. So I also see it as really creative, and how Miró is being creative with also a piece of paper that is part of industrial modernity and design modernity in Barcelona. So the other fascination that I have with this envelope is the envelope itself and its typography. And along with our curatorial assistant, Dolores Rodriguez Roche, who I asked if she could keep an eye on paper in the ADLAN and GOTPAC archives, in particular receipts for typographers, paper suppliers, and she has ferreted out quite a bit, but nothing conclusive with regard to this particular envelope. But it also reminds me that when we talk about artistic modernity in Barcelona, we also have to think about design modernity in Barcelona. And that is where Miró, I think, entered into a vibrant dialogue with Barcelona's design and paper history, that was not in any way a backwards industry in the capital city. It was vibrant in terms of design culture, paper. There's a long history of paper and paper factories throughout Catalonia that stretches back to Catalonia's relationship with the Caribbean and far afield, and also with other parts of Spain and paper pulp factories. And there's a great way that we can think about Miró engaging in that industrial design modernity through his love of paper. And so what we've dug up in some of the receipts is kind of, where this paper came from, who were the advertising agencies for the paper. And so that's also why I really enjoy thinking about that. I think about Miró's artistic modernity intersecting with Barcelona's design modernity. The other thing I would say in relation to this envelope and the invitation cards is that it brings us to where and how we understand that history. Marko has referred to the archives at the College of Architects. Joan and Muriel also referred to these albums and notebooks and various folders in which we find this ephemera. And that is largely thanks to a member of ADLAN who was Adelita Lobo, who was the group's secretary and treasurer. And I have been thinking about where and how Adelita learned these skills. And we know that she learned some of them at a wonderful women's institute in Barcelona that was run by a woman named Francesca Bonmason. So in that regard, there's a lot that has to do with the history of women and women as administrators. Whether Adelita didn't also learn her archiving from Miró. And the reason why I've been thinking about this fantasy is that there were many women who were trained in administrative and secretarial arts in the city. There were many cultural groups. So far, I'm not aware of another album like the one that we have for ADLAN. There may be. A lot of this history is to be rewritten. So in my fantasy in preparation for our conversation, I also imagined Miró showing Adelita the art of keeping an archive. And the art of keeping an archive that is quite heterogeneous. It's kind of a mix between a business archive and a scrapbook, because there are different ephemera pasted and taped into the archive. So this envelope has really allowed me to move outside of any documented or logical terrains and into more kind of worlds of fantasy that I start thinking about in terms of Miró's impact, not only on his fellow artists, but also on his fellow archivists.
Thank you, Jordana. That was wonderful. Thank you for showing us how an envelope can open onto many, many different worlds, and for sharing your passion for paper with us. That was great. So Marko, I think you are our concluding speaker for this portion of the panel.
Thank you very much, Anne, and thank you very much to all of the other speakers. I'm going to jump a little bit. In fact, I'm going to jump beyond ADLAN. I think it's very important for us to realize that the ADLAN period was short. It was not even 4 years that they existed. And one reason they were cut short was the arrival of the Spanish Civil War in July 1936. And what I'm looking at is, in a way, the continuation of the ADLAN group, the ADLAN moment, the ADLAN friendships and relationships, which happened in 1937 in the Spanish Republican Pavilion at the 1937 Paris World's Fair. That pavilion was designed by Josep Lluís Sert, working with other architects. He was not the first listed architect, but it was really very much one of his key buildings. Sert was, of course, one of the key members of the ADLAN group. The artists shown in the Spanish pavilion included all the major artists who had passed through the different ADLAN exhibitions, Picasso, Calder, and so on. It's very important to realize that Calder, as an American artist, was the only non-Spanish artist included in the Spanish pavilion, really because of his friendship with all these other artists. And the work that, the first work that I've chosen is in fact a work that's almost a transitional piece. It was conceived slightly before the, and out of the context of the pavilion, but included in it. It's the stencil Help Spain. It's a small piece of paper. It's around 30 by 20 centimeters. It shows a Catalan peasant raising his fist with the red hats of the, so typical of the Catalan peasant, which Miró had also painted in the series of the Catalan peasants many years before, with a blue background that is also familiar to us from that series of paintings. Very reduced set of shapes. Imagery is very simple, and it has this peculiar circle in the middle next to the head of the person, in which it says 1 FR, 1 franc, which is in fact a leftover from the original commission for the stencil, which was that it was intended to be a postage stamp published by the French Republic in support of the Spanish Republic in its civil war. That postage stamp never materialized, it never happened, but Miró produced the stencil in a limited edition to be sold at the pavilion itself, and it was included in an edition of Cahiers d'Art and entered really art history as one of the really most stunning examples of political art, and really a piece that absolutely shows Miró's commitment to the side of democracy in the Spanish Civil War. At the bottom of the stencil, there is a text, a much quoted text, which in French, which translates roughly as, "In the present struggle, I see on the fascist side spent forces, on the opposite side the people whose boundless creative will gives Spain an impulse that will astonish the world." One of those really typically poetic texts of Miró, who has this capacity to turn even a political slogan into a wonderful short text. The other image that I have to talk about is to be true to its material nature, a photograph. It's a black and white photograph of Miró working in the Spanish pavilion, where he painted the Reaper, a huge wall painting that was on the staircase leading down from the top floor of the pavilion to the first floor, a wall painting called the Reaper that was a reference to the Catalan hymn, almost national, unofficial national anthem of the Reapers, the peasants carrying sickles from the war against the French Napoleonic forces, and a song that has continued to have a really powerful message in Catalonia. Yeah. And which Miró included here in the Spanish pavilion, where it was one of the really major works besides Picasso's Guernica, that was on the open ground floor of the building, and of course, Alexander Calder's Mercury Fountain. One of the kind of sad facts about the Spanish Pavilion, and in particular Miró's large mural painting, The Reaper, is that after the end of the World's Fair, when the pavilion was dismantled, it eventually disappears and nobody knows where it is. It's one of those examples where the kind of minutiae of archival research that we represent in this exhibition come up against the kind of large scale of research and of paintings that are so big that you really wonder, how is it possible that this has disappeared? But of course, we have absolutely no trace of it any longer, apart from the really interesting photos of its production and of it in the pavilion. And I think if I've highlighted those three works, Guernica, of course, because it's such an iconic work of the pavilion, Miró's Reaper and the postage stamp, ADLAN, the stencil, Help Spain, and the Mercury Fountain, because the kind of final demonstration of this long-lasting friendship between the ADLAN group of artists and intellectuals is, of course, that when Miró designed his own studio, not quite 20 years later in Mallorca, he again went to Sert to commission him to build it. And when he then, not quite 20 years after that, decided to build the Fundació Joan Miró in Barcelona as the Center for the Study of Contemporary Art, he also turned to Sert. And our building is now, I think, one of the real jewels of modernism in Barcelona. And of course, to conclude this circle, Calder then donated the Mercury Fountain to the Miro Foundation, and we have it on display here. And of course, in conditions that are entirely different from the ones it was shown in the pavilion, where it was on open display, but people threw coins into the liquid mercury of the fountain, whereas now, of course, given the toxicity of mercury, it's inside a completely sealed chamber, but still has this ability to delight all visitors with that beautiful interplay with the black tarry surface of the structure and the quicksilver, the rapid movements of the liquid mercury as it runs down these different pools and pearls into the basin at the bottom. It's an absolutely wonderful piece of sculpture, and we're really delighted to have it here. Not just because it's such a remarkable sculpture, but also because it is perfect evidence of this lasting friendship between these artists who made up the ADLAN movement.
Thank you, Marko, for describing so beautifully how the ADLAN friendships and connections persisted. And I agree 100%, your building is a gem. And your description of the Mercury Fountain makes us all want to go back there immediately. So I'm looking at my clock. I think we have 8 minutes remaining together. And I have a few discussion questions, which I can toss out now in a compressed fashion. So one thing I would love to hear the exhibition organizers speak to is, in a succinct way, how for you does this exhibition that you've organized shed new light on Miró's role in promoting new art in Barcelona and Paris? and New York. Does anyone wish to take that? Joan.
Sorry. Me parece que nuestra exposición y todos los estudios de Miró realizados desde Cataluña, desde España, tienen que tener en cuenta esa vieja manera de interpretar la historia del arte y la historia de las vanguardias entre el centro y la periferia. Barcelona era una periferia, antes decíamos, ¿no? Miró tuvo que marchar a París para poder desplegar toda su obra. Hay que pensar que en 1917 Joaquín Torres García, otro grande de las vanguardias, en Barcelona hace una conferencia en la que dice no tenemos público. Cuando dice no tenemos público se está refiriendo a que no tiene coleccionismo. No hay un coleccionismo catalán que atienda a esos artistas que están rompiendo con la tradición más conservadora del arte catalán. Me parece que dentro de esta lógica, centro y periferia, Miró se mueve como pez en el agua, ¿no? Es un artista que sabe que está en una periferia y, sin embargo, a través de sus amigos del ADLAN, intenta que Barcelona suba de nivel. Con actos privados, es cierto, pero hay un poeta que todos conocéis, un poeta muy querido en Cataluña, que es Pere Quart, que siempre decía que la cultura siempre ha sido minoritaria. La alta cultura, la poesía. Me parece que sería muy arrogante por parte nuestra, no sé qué dicen mis estimadas colegas, pero sería muy arrogante por nuestra parte pensar que nuestra exposición ilumina un nuevo camino sobre la interpretación de Miró. Porque eso no dependerá de nosotros, sino que dependerá de si desde el centro escuchan a la periferia. Nuestra exposición está hecha en un centro que, como sabe Marko, yo amo desde hace muchos años. He trabajado mucho para la Fundación Miró, pero la Fundación Miró está, aparte de los problemas de la pandemia, en una ciudad que es periférica, que el mundo del arte depende o sea, que los museos han dependido durante muchos años del turismo. Esta exposición, diría que es una suerte, ya sé que es un contrasentido, pero es una suerte que no haya turismo, porque quien va a ver esta exposición la entenderá mucho mejor. Ese capítulo de Miró de luchar contra las fuerzas conservadoras del país para conseguir que la modernidad sea algo dinámico, digamos, dialogante.
Thank you very much. Should I ask another question? Say yes or no.
Yeah, I
all
think
of you.
We can chat for another few minutes and then we can leave some time for general reflections. I think.
Okay. All right. So, you know, I was struck. It seems that Miró, in his 5 exhibitions in Barcelona, exhibited in a number of different types of spaces. And I was curious if someone could speak to their different qualities of those spaces. You know, was it a philosophical choice to move beyond a gallery system, or was it pragmatism or something in between? Yeah.
Contesto yo.
Thank you, Muriel.
A ver, yo creo que es una mezcla de ambos, una mezcla de pragmatismo y también de convicción. Yo creo que de convicción, porque como dice Joan, estamos en una ciudad periférica y la idea era intentar ampliar las acciones y las propuestas culturales a toda la ciudad y a todos los lugares de la ciudad. Pero también por conveniencia, hemos de tener claro que ADLAN no tenía sede, compartía sede con GATPAC en Paseo de Gracia y que por lo tanto con la cantidad de actividades que programaron tenían que diversificar los espacios, ¿no? donde poder hacerlos, ¿no? También cuando decimos que intentan expandirlo por toda la ciudad, hemos de tener muy claro que ADLAN era, como ya se ha dicho, pero lo repetimos, surge de la pequeña burguesía, es decir, surge de las élites y unas élites que se movían en una Barcelona muy, muy concreta y en el fondo muy reducida. En el mapa que antes habéis podido ver que enseñaba Joan, en el fondo estamos hablando de Passeig de Gràcia, carrer Diputació, Consell de Cent, Plaza Cataluña y un poco unos focos en la parte alta de la ciudad, como podría ser la calle Montaner o Ganduxer, ¿no? Por lo tanto, es una Barcelona en el fondo bastante reducida, ¿no? Era una asociación muy activa, programó muchísimas actividades, por lo tanto tenía que utilizar todos los espacios posibles, ¿no? Y esta amplitud de la mirada que tuvo ADLAN de programar actividades muy heterogéneas, muy diferentes, que hasta ese momento no habían tenido, podríamos decir, la consideración de lenguaje, de categoría artística, también esta amplitud de miras la intentan tener con los espacios que utilizan. Por lo tanto, no utilizan únicamente los oficialmente aceptados como centros culturales o como espacios culturales, como podrían ser las galerías de arte, sino que se intentan expandirse y utilizar diferentes espacios. Así utilizan casas privadas, la casa de Miró, la casa de Sert, casa de Delita Lobo, entre otros muchos. Utilizan clubs de tenis, auditorios en un club de tenis, utilizan tiendas como podía ser la joyería Roca, que era de un socio de ADLAN, utilizan ferias de muestras, incluso cuando se mueven de Barcelona pues utilizan una carpa de circo en Mataró, utilizan diversos emplazamientos muy diferentes, además de galerías de arte como podía ser Sira, como podía ser Catalonia o como podía ser la sede de GAPAC. Por lo tanto, yo creo que intentan utilizar todos los medios que tienen a su alcance para todo y ser actividades restringidas que llegaran al máximo público posible, ¿no? Y por eso es muy interesante, por ejemplo, que utilizaran ferias de muestras, o sea, centros, podríamos decir, comerciales, empresariales, donde exhibían obras de arte. Hay dos casos muy claros, la feria de muestras del 33, donde exhiben obras de Calder, de Ángel Ferran y de Joan Miró, o el stand de Mitba, que Mitba se traduce algo así, que sería como muebles y decoración de la vivienda actual del 36, un stand diseñado por Sert, por Torras Clavé, por Antoni Bonet, y en el cual está presidido por una gran obra de Miró, que como decoración, que precisamente ahora está en Harvard, en el Museo de Harvard, como donación de Sert, ¿no? Por lo tanto, tenemos en este caso una conjunción entre arquitectura, entre diseño de interiores y entre arte moderno, un poco para ilustrar a esos burgueses que querían ser modernos, cómo tenían que decorar también sus casas, ¿no? Y también una manera, yo no sé si era como una intuición, una clarividencia que tuvieron los de ADLAN o algo así, de por dónde irían un poco las cosas por el futuro, ¿no? El utilizar el arte, el utilizar la cultura como mercancía, como elemento mercantil en espacios empresariales o comerciales. ¿Cómo hubiera acabado la cosa si no hubiera habido la guerra civil? No lo sabemos, porque realmente en el 36 ADLAN por primera vez tiene una sede propia en Consell de Cent, y a partir de ese momento las pocas actividades que en esos meses hicieron, las hicieron en esta sede. Por lo tanto, no sabemos si hubieran continuado con esta expansión por la ciudad o se hubieran recluido al final en su propia sede.
Yeah. No, thank you. That leaves an open question, doesn't it? And I think the whole point of rethinking how perhaps art historians have been a little myopic about thinking of exhibition histories only in terms of fine art spaces is something that your show and your research really encourages us to be more expansive, right? About what it means to display art or to exhibit art or to what the sorts of publics are. So I guess a last question I had is if anyone wants to talk a little bit about the importance of archives. I'm sure you all want to talk about the importance of archives, both personal and institutional, in mapping the relations between artists and the context, local contexts in which they made and then exhibited their work.
Yeah, I think I'll answer that by just pointing to how we addressed that idea in the exhibition, and I'll try and be quick about it since I know we're running low on time and we probably have to limit our final comments to just brief remarks. But one thing that we tried to do in the show was to make these archives visible. So for example, we referred to this album Grand Bazaar, which is at the Historic Archive of the College of Architects. And we've created a video, a plasma, where you can actually see all of the pages of the album being shared virtually. That's one way that we've also tried to make these archives visible to the general public, since these are quite precious objects. We've also put on display this clippings notebook where we can see Adelita Lobo's beautiful, almost markings, framings of each of these press things. We've also brought out archival material from the foundation, Miro's sketches, his own registry of his work is on display, so that we can also have a pairing of Miro's personal archives as an artist and what a group, an institution, even as ad hoc as it may have been, creates in their archives. And then we've also done some ways in which we hope the visitors can enter the idea of the geography of the city as its own archive. So there's a large amplified map in which these spaces are mapped out. So we can literally see the city too as an archive. And then there's also a wall that's tried to kind of almost dump out the invitations onto the wall so that visitors can get that sense of excitement and visuality that these traces of paper hold. So we've tried to also include photography, which is another kind of archival trace and shows the intimacy and the relation of these members and friends in their travels, but as also the printed page. So the magazine also as a kind of archive in print that had its own afterlife. So we've tried to kind of museologically also make visible the way that the archive impacted Miró and ADLAN.
No, thank you. And it looks to me like your exhibition achieves that in so many different ways, which is just incredible. Well, I guess the last question to toss out to everybody, and which I think all of the different archiving impulses beg the question of, is history. Like, archives are made with the idea that someone is going to look at them and draw conclusions from them in some way. So I think I'd like to ask each of our participants sort of how we began. Like, how did what did you learn? What did each of you learn that was new, that surprised you from this exhibition? Did it change? Like, yeah, what changed? What changed for you about the way you think?
I would love to hear you and Marko say, because for you, we've lived with this show for a long time, for many years. I personally, I have learned the best and greatest from my friends, from working with Muriel and Joan. I've learned a lot about Miró, but I would say I had a personal growth in terms of being a co-curator with such wonderful colleagues. But for you all, seeing the project, I'd love to hear what you took away from it.
I mean, I can go first if you want, Marko.
By all means.
I'll be brief. Well, I think I've always had a sense of Miró as someone who is deeply conscious of his place in the pantheon, right? And I love that letter. I can't remember if it was Joan or Muriel who quotes when he says to Raffles, "Save my letters, we're going to need them." Yeah. So what this exhibition did for me is sort of contextualize that interest in his personal place in art history within this broader project, right? That is a cultural one that's both local and international at the same time, and made me, think about it in broader terms, like beyond his studio, in ways that I want to keep thinking about. So
thanks very much, Anne. I think one of the things that I learned and that really inspired me, that excited me about this project, is the way in which it draws out parallels and similarities between this point in the 1930s and our present situation. There are so many things that are different, and then others, of course, that are similar. You know, in the early 1930s, the world was coming out of a global financial crisis. We are in the I hope final stages of pandemic. We are beset by forces that are against progress, against democracy in so many different ways, in so many different places. And I think ADLAN really represented this incredible wish for and drive for modernity, for openness, for an international view of the world, the interconnectedness of different places, cultures, countries. And that, I think, is something which we can really learn a lot from. It's that's really, I think, one of the most significant moments for me also. And I think this applies very specifically here in Barcelona, but I think it also applies on a more general level right across the world.
No, I think that's beautiful. I mean, you're making me think of that famous, right? You have to be an international Catalan.
Yes.
And we need the world needs to be thinking we need to be international citizens.
Yes.
So.
Yeah. Good.
So, shall we say?
I think that's a great note to end on, if everyone agrees.
It's thank you all so much for joining us here, both people who are in the talk and people who are viewing this online. It's been, I think, a real pleasure for all of us to share our impressions of the exhibition. Thank you very much, Anne, for steering us through all of this so masterfully. Thanks again to New York University for hosting this, and my thanks also to the technical team, especially at New York University, who have guided us expertly through all the intricacies of doing a Zoom seminar. And of course, really especially thank you to the curators of this project, who've realized this beautiful and really interesting and exciting project here at the Miro Foundation. And I very much hope that many of you will be able to come to Barcelona to see this exhibition at some point, or to come to Barcelona in any case in the near future, in the same way that I hope that we will all soon be able to go back to New York and visit our friends and colleagues there. So thank you all very much, and looking forward to seeing all of us together in the same space at some point soon.
Yes,
thanks, everyone.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much.
Thank you very much.
For your beautiful show. Okay,
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you.